It's going pretty well. We've got quite a day here at the Voice of College Football. We've got our other show that I won't name right after this at 7 o'clock. Then we've got a big the State of the Voice of College Football show coming up at 8. So we've been running since about 11 this morning.
Yeah, it's that time of year. There's a whole lot going on. We've been talking about trials. There's now 4 trials. You've got the one in Tallahassee, Florida State versus the ACC in North Carolina. You got Clemson in South Carolina, and also now in North Carolina. So all kind of stuff coming up. The one in April 9th in Florida, and waiting on the decision from the one in North Carolina currently. The judge said it'd be before the April 8th, so everybody's kind of waiting on pins and needles there, but there's not a ton of new news besides just the fact that I just mentioned that ACC did file suit against Clemson in North Carolina. But one thing that I've been talking about on my show, and Chris had a show kind of pondering, can this team be as good as last year's team? What kind of, what are we looking at? Just with 4 or 5 practices in, you know, what's it looking like at spring practice? Are we going to take a step forward? Or are we looking like at a big step back? I'm real hyped up. I think, obviously a homer. This is the Florida State Voice of College Football show. But just from 5 days in and talking to different people, it's really kind of an exciting time at Florida State football when you see the amount of athletes across the field and the kind of competition from the very top of the roster to the bottom. It's kind of a year, we've said a lot, compared it more to 2022, because you have kind of a lot of unknowns across the field. You got a lot of guys ready to step up into a leadership position. But the difference this year is the athletes. You had like a 31% blue chip ratio coming into 2022. Now you hear 2 years later, you're in the 60s. And you've got top 100 recruits just across the field, whether you got them out of high school or they transferred for Alabama, still top 100 recruits from their respective classes. When you look at guys like Jalen Brown, Destin Hill, a guy from 2021 who you finally get, and now he's playing his sophomore year in 2024. And I guess we can start with the offense. I didn't ask which one you wanted to talk about first, but just real exciting.
I love this topic. So later this week, folks, we've got Logan Robinson, and we're breaking down all the positions. But I love this topic that George just brought up, looking at 2023, what should have been a playoff team that went undefeated and won the ACC championship and was the best Florida State team since 2013. Okay, my first thought is, if you just look at gains and losses, almost every team in the country is going to look worse just on the surface, but unless they had some kind of crazy transfer portal haul. But the thing is that guys get better. So you look at certain players and you think, how in the world can we replace him or him because his backup's not as good? Well, guys get better. That's what spring football is about. That's what summer camp. These guys lift all year. They train, they get better, and so forth. And that blue chip ratio, that, you're looking at a 30% blue chip ratio that produced the 13-0 ACC championship team, basically. And now you're doubling that going forward. And again, there's an inexperience factor, but there always is. These guys all are inexperienced at some point. So let's start at quarterback, because that's the obvious drop off out of the gate, in my estimation. I wouldn't have said that like 3 years ago. I can't believe I'm saying that, but Jordan Travis duped me and became one of the best quarterbacks in the country. DJ, I'm not going to say that he hasn't gotten better, because he has. He had a really rough season a few years ago. Now he's put together 21 TD, 7 picks, 22 TD, 7 pick season. So he has been better. So he's learned something with a really good developer of quarterbacks in Jonathan Smith at Oregon State. So hopefully that parlays into another good offensive guy, of course, in Mike Norvell. So just starting there, it appears to be a decent drop off.
Yeah, and right before I get into quarterback, you brought up a very good point. Look, people get tunnel focused into their team. And I think I've heard James talking about this same subject, okay? It's not just Florida State that has to replace people. And Mark spoke on it. When somebody leaves, Michigan had 19 people at the combine, so they're losing 20 something upperclassmen, NFL, undrafted free agents by you add a couple more guys. Florida State lost 12. They lost an Akeem Dent. But who are you replacing them with? When you look at a team who is your top competition, your game you've got circled, it's Notre Dame and Clemson, but within the conference, it's Clemson. Just happens to be where DJU came from. But the guys that they're losing, they're having to replace them in some cases with true freshmen or totally unproven young guys. Florida State and kind of the new way that Derek Ray and Mike Norvell have done their personnel, you're getting guys in who are at a different level, and you're able to just kind of, and a lot of times, upgrade. You saw it with Jermaine Johnson in 2021. You saw it with Jared Verse and those guys in 2022. You saw it with Braden Fisk. And to your point about quarterback last year, guys, Jordan Travis went out against before the Florida game. So you saw this team go on and win its ACC championship, should have got a title berth with a Brock Glenn, who's probably going to be he'll probably be your second quarterback, but all the kind of thing. It's all towards, DJU. As far as addressing the position itself and how much drop off we'll have between, kind of the last 2 years, what we had in Jordan Travis, what we have this year in DJU, I would say it's going to be different. It's going to be very different. Luckily, another factor in this is the schedule. And this is another thing I've heard James talk about. Like, DJU doesn't have to open up against LSU in this giant game and have 3 conference games before September's over, and all these things. It's not too bad of a schedule. I think DJU by the end of the year is going to have his best season ever at quarterback. So he's had like a 3-to-1 touchdown ratio you mentioned a minute ago. I don't know if he gets to 4-to-1. We predicted somewhere on the show around 3,500 yards and 30 touchdowns. I think that, in this offense filled with playmaker, he's going to be able to do that. And the quarterback room as a whole is far and away the best it's been. You can question because of the elite play of Jordan Travis, the last 12 games of his career, whether DJU is going to be able to live up to that level. But when you look at having DJU and then Brock Glenn and then Luke Kromenhoek and then a walk-on 4-star and Trevor Jackson, the overall health and depth of that room, it's in a beautiful place.
James is here. Big Game James Coleman, Den Media Group. James, appreciate you being here as always, sir. What we're doing is, George had mentioned that Chris served this up the other night in regards to, can this team be as good as last year's team? And so we started to make some comparisons and started at quarterback.
Again, the biggest thing is it's all about schedule comparisons. There's no LSU to open up the season with. There is a lot of comparisons to 2023 schedule in general. It is, I'll give respect because out of both rivalries, this one tends to be the better. This one seems to be better, but I would say it's a 3-team schedule. But but last year, where the schedule was toughest was in September. Now you have a pushback to where October is really when you're going to have your first real test. Then you get the rest. Then you have another test against Miami. Then you have another. I mean, we can call it games. You got to win them, but nothing is as tough as playing Notre Dame. And what we've seen the last decade or so is Notre Dame tends to kind of start trending down for whatever reason that month of November. They'll have a quarterback controversy that they'll have to try to figure out with Riley Leonard not being fully healthy right now. They'll be a very good team, but they won't be what they were. And I'd argue that the team that Notre Dame had that came into Doak a few years ago, 2021, was hands down, top to bottom, way better than Florida State was. And Florida State took them into overtime. So, and honestly, God's truth, had the game won if some things would have happened a little bit differently. So when I say this to people is, to me, the talent level is similar to 2023 from top to bottom. I'd argue that the roster is better. I'd compare it more to 2022, considering that we don't have the guys I call the jersey names yet. In 2022, I was trying to convince Seminole Nation that Jordan Travis is nowhere near as bad as what people think he is. He's actually really, really good. And, people call me crazy. We didn't know who Johnny Wilson was. We didn't know who Trey Benson was. We didn't know who Mekhi Pittman was at that time. We didn't know. There's a lot of unknowns. Jared Verse people were excited about him, but we didn't know. Would he be Jermaine Johnson? Would he be worse? Can you catch lightning in a bottle twice? Who knows? D tackle wise, who's healthy, who's not healthy. A lot of question marks in that 2022 team. Ended up winning 10 games with a better Clemson, a better NC State team that, regardless of whether you think they're good or not, historically, we just don't play NC State like we don't dominate them. It's always a hard-nosed game. And trying to think
4 NFL D linemen that year.
So yeah,
4 legit guys
with the NFL left tackle as well. So I mean, I'm trying. It's
Louisville was baked in that run. Yep. Wake Forest when they had like 60 seniors and everything because of COVID.
So what I'm saying is that we don't have that. We got North Carolina without Drake May and still has it with no answers to their defense. We've got we don't have NC State on our roster. We have Duke minus Riley Leonard. And I personally tell people go watch the game, not just for the enjoyment, but go watch the game. But I'll give Riley the scrappiness that he kept it, but the game was trending back to where Florida State was at, even with Riley Leonard in the game. But it's, again, you have all that. So I'll say all that to say DJU 3-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. I don't need DJU to go 4-to-1. I need DJU to go 3-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio, and we're going to win a lot of football games. I need Malik Benson to be at least comparable to what Pokey Wilson was in 2022. I need Hakeem to be what we thought he was. I need Destin Hill to be what we've hoped him to be. I need, we've got a lot of guys that are there, a lot of hope. They ain't made a play in Florida State yet. So now I will say this. The defense is full of people who made plays at Florida State. Shaheem Brown, Azaria Thomas, Fintrell Cypress, Conrad Hussey, Joshua Farmer, Patrick Payton. And now, so even with those guys alone, that's a solid defense. Now you add into it Marvin Jones Jr., who you're hoping he's somewhere in the spectrum. Can we capture lightning in a bottle 3 times in a row with a transfer portal DN? We're hoping he's between Jared Verse and Jermaine Johnson in terms of production. Earl Little Jr., who actually wasn't bad at Alabama. He's coming over here to give you even more of a wealth of embarrassment of riches when it comes to the secondary. People complain. We have DJ Lundy that came back that looks better. He's a productive linebacker. And then you added a piece with Sean Murphy, who, I mean, for what I'm looking at, looks pretty good at that linebacker position. And then that's Darrell Jackson. The only time we saw him play was against Georgia, and I'm not going to hold that against him. You're going out there, you lost a lot of guys. All that being said, nobody has 85 cats. 85 is the scholarship limit. Nobody is perfect from 1 to 85. But if you've got your 2 deep, or I'd argue your top 50 are just as good, if not better, than all your opponents, that's who's going to play a majority of the games. I'd argue that Florida State right now probably has 60 to 65 guys that are pretty good. So if you lose 12 guys, as long as you don't play a Georgia or somebody like that, you should be relatively okay to get through the season. But that's just looking at these guys from seeing 2 practices, and I'll be at practice tomorrow. And as I tell everybody, my opinion is cool. It's only one person that I think Florida State really, if they impress this person, then I know we're going to be on track. And it's like Groundhog Day. Like when he comes out and he doesn't like to practice, then that's like, more months of bad luck. But like if Trey's going to practice tomorrow, my son. And if my son goes in there and gives him a good report, every time he's given a good report, Florida State has looked really, really good. So I'm looking forward to what he has to say. But from what I saw a much improved team.
I can't wait to
improved team that's going to be fine.
I can't wait to see Trey's thing. And before Mark changes or we go to Chris, I just wanted to point out what James said a bunch of times about lightning striking a bottle twice, 3 times at defensive line, at linebacker. I would just, for people out there, I know it's hard to think, but just think back to 21 and 22 and what you thought of Johnny Wilson coming in, what the national narrative was around Jordan Travis heading into year 2, year 3. And then look at where these guys that we've brought in were thought of, where they were ranked. 247 actually had them as blue chips. So I have the ultimate faith that these guys are going to come through. You can't have, hits, but one of these 3 DNs, I have the ultimate faith is going to come through. And like James spoke of, 3/4 of the roster is at another level than it was before, whether they have the starting experience or not.
Chris Frazier's here, Spiratics, right here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate Chris, James, George being here on Wednesday nights here at the Voice of College Football at 6 p.m. Eastern time. So, Chris, blame George, but he let me steal your topic from the other day. Can this football team be as good as they were in 2023? We've looked all over the place, but especially at quarterback, because that's the most obvious place to go to say Jordan Travis, one of the very best in the country. DJ has not been that, maybe more like a top 25 or 30 guy. So I know you've already run through this to a certain extent, but where do you go when trying to compare these two teams, at least at this point?
Well, to me, and this some people would disagree, I'm sure. I'm not a Clemson fan nor an Oregon State fan, so I'm sure those would disagree with me. But DJU got coached by an offensive coordinator that was let go the same year that he transferred. Oregon State's not known to be this miraculous national contender at any point that I know of. There's a different level of coaching at Florida State right now. There's definitely a different layer of play calling that's going on at Florida State on offense. I think Tony Tokarts doesn't get enough hype for what he does with developing quarterbacks on top of what the team does within itself. But I think that DJU, it'll be a huge failure if this isn't the best college or collegiate year under DJU. One, yes, he's older, but changing the question mark behind Florida State isn't if they can be as good as 2023. The question is, will they mesh together quick enough to be as good? If I knew that this team would be here for the next 2 years with DJU and so on, and I would say, yeah, this team will end up being better than the 2023 team just based off of the level of talent that's now on the roster versus what it was. And that's all around. We got to quit acting like DJU wasn't a 5-star prospect. Everybody else use it in their favor, but when we talk about Florida State, well, he didn't show that he was a 5-star. He didn't do good enough at Clemson, or he wasn't good enough at such and such at Oregon State or whatever. My issue with any of that is if he was anywhere else, they would be talking about they got a former 5-star quarterback out of high school, blah, blah, blah. He's done this. But coaching wasn't that. So I'm going to do the same thing that everybody else does and say that I think that our coaching staff will develop DJU to his best potential. So we'll see what happens. But based off everything in the very short amount of spring that we've had, DJ is what was expected. And Mike Norvell being excited about it, the way he was excited about Jordan Travis last year, that feeds me a lot of hope because Mike might have coach speak, but I don't think Mike BS's his fan base or the people around him. So if he's excited, we should be excited. He's just one of those guys. So I think we will, as long as we mesh together, we will be as good as 2023.
So if we go to the weapons, James kind of ran through the weapons and the uncertainty of some of the guys that had come in the past, and then they proved it. Keon Coleman, nobody questioned that because he had caught 50, 60 balls at Michigan State. When I look at the ceiling of Hakeem Williams and Destin Hill, then it's like, okay, I can see it. Obviously, they have yet to prove it at this level. Hakeem Williams hasn't had a chance. At running back, though, is there another Trey Benson between Roydell Williams, Lawrence Toafili, who's been really good when given the opportunity and healthy and all that. So George, Trey Benson, I think, this is a guy that, as James mentioned, when he comes from Oregon, had very little experience, and he turns out to be one of the best running backs in the country.
Yeah, I won't spend a ton of time on this. I feel like you hit the nail on the head, right? Kind of where you were leading me with that one. Roydell Williams, and it goes to what I kind of said before we went to Chris. These guys that have came in, a Roydell Williams, his pedigree, versus what Trey Benson when he came in, injured, people wondering if he's ever going to be the same guy again. Johnny Wilson, been at Oregon or Arizona State for 2 years and only had 100-something yards, but all these blocking, I have, the utmost faith that Roydell Williams and even a young guy like Cam Davis coming in is a different kind of running back prospect that we've had here at Florida State in the last few years. So yes, Trey Benson, we kind of knew what we had going into this year. But I do agree that Toafili is ready to step into a starting role. There was times I didn't want to see anybody but him touch the ball in that Louisville game. The way he was rushing and using some of those wildcat packages. One of the predictions I made, somebody already said one of them. I made 4 predictions earlier, but one of them is that Alex Atkins will have, the most rushing yards from running backs in his offense in his time at Florida State. And I think that's just kind of your top 3. And then you have Kazai even there, working to be in that top 3 with LT and Roydell and the rest of those guys. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Here's what I tell people when they ask, these similar questions. What was Jordan Travis before Mike Norvell and his staff developed him? What was Trey Benson before he was developed at Florida State? What was Johnny Wilson before he was developed at Florida State? What was Jared Verse before he was developed at Florida State? Who was Braden Fisk before he was developed at Florida State? Who was Bell before he was developed? Bell had some production, but he didn't have near the production and make the plays that he did at Florida State that he did for South Carolina. I mean, he was a good player, but was he what he is now as being a draft pick? Was Jared Verse going to make it be a first rounder if he was to stay at Albany? Was Fisk going to be a first rounder if he was to stay where he came from? No, these players were good, and the thing is Mike Norvell and the staff are like most men. When we look, if you love cars, you look at an old rust bucket that your wife would look at you and say, "Damn, why do you want a car that looks like that?" Because we don't see what it is, we see what it can be, and they know that they have the talent to make it what it can be. So Jordan Travis was talking before Mike got here, was talking about being a wide receiver, completely just giving up on football. And he had a coach tell him, "No, you see those Heismans out there? We think you can be that." And there he was in the Heisman race till he got hurt. Trey Benson didn't do anything at Oregon, which I'm repeating some of what was said, but Johnny Wilson for sure had almost no production whatsoever as a wide receiver. Now he's going to go in the NFL draft. Would he have went if he stayed at Arizona State? I would like to think so because Kenny Dillingham took over, but not under what he had before that. So I think what people are leaving out is just how good Odell Higgins is at developing defensive tackles, how good Papuchis is developing defensive ends. And then what was Kalen DeLoach before this staff came in here and gave him the opportunity to play? That would be the one I'd say you had true talent, that the only thing you really needed for that kid was to let him get the opportunity to play. Outside of that, I think there was huge development made at every position of those that we're looking at possibly being, NFL draft picks now. And now you've raised the entire talent level for the 2024 squad with what you brought in. Jared Verse was a no-star, 2-star at best when he came out of high school. Fisk was barely a 3-star when he was coming out of high school. You can't tell me that everybody else just missed on these guys, and all of a sudden they become this force to be reckoned with at Florida State, and that's by lightning in the bottle. When you did it 2 years in a row, who was Jamie Robinson before he left and came over to Florida State from South Carolina? There's so many guys that you can point out and say, well, what were they before they came here and got developed? And I think that's what we keep missing on. Great for the kids. Glad they have talent. But I'm more happy that they were coachable and that this coaching staff gave their all into those young men. And now they've turned into the football players that they are today from also the coaching and also their God-given talent and willing to be coached.
And along those lines, I'm curious to hear from James. I'm guessing, James, you can think of certain guys that you played alongside or played on the other side of the ball from, teammates, that one season you were like, he's a weak link. He doesn't know what he's doing, whatever the case might be. Then maybe by the next spring, wow, he's added 20 pounds. He's better, or he knows what he's doing. He's figured some things out. And then by August camp, wow, he's better. And then by the next football season, he's almost a different player.
It happens all the time. I mean, one of the things that we do too much as America loves underdog stories, they love throwing people away before they even have an opportunity to develop. I mean, you know, like I joke with people, I turned 18 during freshman two-a-days. So I went to college at 17. You know, and most of the guys in my class, we call it a Duval red shirt now, you know, they came to college at 19. Like one guy, I won't say which teammate it was, but that was in my class. He turned 20, like 21, like right before the bowl game. So like they're grown men, and I was like, and your puberty hits people differently. We're all growing into our bodies, and as well as, you know, adjusting to a myriad of other things. Going to college, going to class by yourself without your mom and dad waking you up. Workouts, coaches ain't nice to you no more. It's a lot of different things. So, you know, I'll say that like guys kind of hit their switch. I also like to say it's a boxing term, but styles make fights. So how can the guy, I forgot his name, he looks like Fluffy, the old comedian, beat Anthony Joshua, who was the heavyweight champion, but you know, Anthony Joshua makes everybody else who looks like they can fight good. Well, how can Wilder lose to I can't think of my guy's name, the Gypsy, the Gypsy
Fury.
King. Fury. Tyson Fury's style is so twitchy and he can take a punch that, you know, that style made that matchup. So what does that mean? Johnny Wilson gets recruited because he's a pretty decent kid out of high school to go to Arizona State. But Mike Norvell sees a piece in his offense where he can utilize him and make him better. Why does Trey Benson? And Trey Benson gave a great look at to why he went to Florida State. Mike Norvell was one of his first offers coming out of high school at Memphis, and Mike just never kind of let go of that. Same thing with Jaheim Bell. Jaheim Bell was looking at coming at Florida State, but he was a bigger wide receiver, and Florida State wanted to make him a tight end. Florida State could have just lied to him like South Carolina and just said, hey, come on, play whatever, and then next thing you know, you're a tight end. But they didn't. They kept him. You know, they said they were going to keep the man. They told him that he was a tight end. So then he comes back when they say, hey, show me how you want to utilize me. I say these things to say that when Mike looks in the transfer portal and in recruiting, he's looking for specific things. He's not looking at your stars. Hell, Mike said on my show, one of the first interviews that he's ever done was, I can't help the star that you come in as. I can only help the star that you leave. And now that he's gotten 4 years into this, you're seeing the proof in the production with 12. Like we got 12 guys that went to the combine. Hakeem Dent should have went to the combine. Big Meech probably should have went to the combine as well. And you know, Roddick maybe not, but there's 15 to 16 guys that they're going to get a chance to get a cup of coffee in the league, and that is a high number for any team, in particular for Florida State. But I think, you know, Mike has a system and a philosophy that's going to always cater and make things better. And it's only going to get more fun because if you I don't like to look too far in the future, but if you look into 2025, we don't know what Bama going to look like without Nick Saban, but I can tell you what I'm not afraid of: Alabama without Nick Saban. So, but that's still a game that you have to respect, and similar to what we had with LSU. But the rest of that schedule in 2025 isn't very difficult. So you're going to have a lot of guys get to the NFL draft next year, potentially get drafted in the 2025 draft. That's going to be something to where now high school guys got to say, all right, man, they may not love on me like everybody else in recruiting, but if the goal is to go to the NFL, they sure as hell putting a lot of people in the NFL. And what does that look like? Ohio State, Georgia, the other teams that are kind of in the top. They're the reason why they can go in and recruit the way they recruit is because, hey, if you want to go to the league, just look at our recent history. So I think that's one of the things that Mike and these guys have going for them. On top of the fact that they just got a good system and they know how to. They just seem. Mike had the best quote. Again, Mike's got a lot of quotes, but Mike had a quote like, "We don't take the most transfer portal players. Ours are just good." So it's like he's like we don't like. There are way more people who take way more portal guys than we take. We just happen to have starters because our system is good enough for them to get developed. And again, that just they have a system. They stick with it. They ride with it. On top of having a bunch of coaches that aren't leaving every year to go do something else, which I think is also indicative of the type of program. Is people talk about culture, but you got coaches as well as players that want to stay.
No doubt. And James, you kind of hit upon this. So George, when I think of a game wrecker on defense, I think of the edge position. Obviously, it can come from a lot of different positions, but I think an edge guy. And Jermaine Johnson was the big transfer that kind of was one of the leading players to turn this program around. And then obviously he spun that into a top 10 NFL selection to the Jets. And then it was Jared Verse. And James went through obviously a lot of hype surrounding him, but he played at Albany. So boom, he becomes a star. And so is Patrick Payton? Does he have that kind of potential?
That's kind of the exact point, that I made earlier. And to what James was just saying, Patrick Payton, that's another, and also a prediction I made. I think either Patrick Payton or Marvin Jones Jr. is going to get to that 10+ sack number and be that guy. Will they be Jared Verse in year 2? That's kind of tough, but the kind of performance you saw somewhere between the performance you saw from Jared Verse in year 1 and kind of what Jermaine Johnson did, I think is absolutely on the table. And to the point of what Chris was saying, is it lightning striking in a bottle, or is it more along what we've been talking about in Norvell identifying the exact traits he needs in a defensive end and getting him on campus? Patrick Payton in specifics, he was a high school guy that we've brought and developed since he was a 3-star. What's just important as reloading every year and adding to the portal is that number at the bottom, the number of guys that leave every year. 15 to 20 guys every year leave. Just as, that's how you have room to bring 15, 20 portal guys in, et cetera, et cetera. The guys that stay around are the guys that are 100 bought in, and they're a part. There's 8 of them from 20, 8 from 21, and Patrick Payton is one of those guys, and I absolutely believe he's going to kind of step into his own and be at worst, 3rd-round draft pick. If I had to predict, I'd say 2nd round. But yeah, he has a chance as that pass rusher out there, to do it. I think he can. And either him or Marvin Jones will have over 10 sacks before it's over with.
Oh, my bad too. Patrick Payton's the guy. Like, you asked me one question too, Mark, and I didn't answer that. But Cam Wembley is the guy. Cam Wembley was I believe he was the number 15th overall pick in the NFL draft by Tennessee Titans, if I remember correctly. In my class, he came in my recruiting class. Was a contributor by the time he was a junior. Played, but not like was a player. But I remember like that spring of our junior year, like, oh wow, okay, Cam gained a little bit of weight. I was like, Cam done grew up a little bit. Like he's not just a speed rush guy. All of a sudden he got a bull rush now, and all of a sudden he's got some moves. And we go into fall camp, and he's like unblockable. And then we play Miami that first game, and I think he had 2 or 3 sacks on, was his name Eric Winston, I believe. But he was a left tackle that was an All-American going into the season, and Cam made him look like a total idiot, and basically got drafted off of that game alone of what he did. And then just seeing some of the things that he did. I remember one time he got cut blocked, great cut block by the running back, and his legs went all the way up in the air, and his hands got on the ground, and he did a push-up, like a handstand push-up, to get back on his feet and then reach back and then grab the quarterback to bring him down for a sack. And I was just like, man, I don't know if he's been on some HGH. Well, we didn't know what HGH was, but all we knew was steroids. I don't know if he's on roids or what's going on, but I'm grateful because he's really, really good. So, just stuff like that. You do see guys, then you see freaks like Antonio Cromartie, who just Cromartie was Cromartie. Like that guy was like, some people are born to do certain things, and that guy was born to be a football player. So, and tongue-in-cheek joke to have kids, but he did both of them at a really high level. So, that's but yeah. So I think Patrick Payton is a guy that's kind of like that. He's been the Robin for the last few years. He hasn't been the guy, but I can see him kind of coming into his own this year. And it's, again, he's the guy, but like what is Marvin Jones? What is Durajay? What is Lolo? A lot of these other guys, it's kind of, I'm intrigued. That defensive end room is crazy because we can argue that defensive end room is better this year than it has been in the last 2 years, which, again, Jared Verse, for all intents and purposes, considered the top 15 pick.
I feel like Pat Payton I've seen some tongue-in-cheek comments, like he's got a little rivalry going there with Marvin Jones Jr. He wants to show guys that he's kind of that guy. Very interesting.